forgive me if I'm a little like slower than normal, because I am from New York and I'm a little jet lagged right now. All right, I'm gonna ask you all a really stupid question. Okay, so in this audience, can I just get a show of hands? How many of you are founders or own your own business? Show of hands. Okay. So now, definitely worth the applause, because I know, like, this is Pinayista, so this community over-indexes on founders and owners, right? But everybody that raised your hand, you are an anomaly, right? Filipinos are the third largest Asian community in this country, but we only own 5% of Asian-owned businesses. That is we woefully underrepresent when it comes to stuff that we own, right? And so it's really hard to comprehend why that is, because Filipinos are everywhere, right? We power businesses, we power economies, we make a lot of people really freaking rich. And we don't own, well, most of those businesses we don't own, and that's sad. You know, and you have to think about, think further on it, and it's not about capacity, because when you look at our household income data, median household income for Filipino households, and you can break that down further because there are multiple wage earners in there, but we are still above the national average at $106,000. That's still higher than a lot of other communities. When you think about the collective buying power of the Filipino American community, our collective buying power is $163 billion, right? So the question of economic strength, that's not really the question. The question is whether or not we can convert that strength into ownership. More often than not, our conversation centers on visibility. I want you to see me, I want to be represented, but here's the truth. When we are visible and own nothing, that ultimately becomes performative representation. It's not visible, right? And so when you think about ownership, right, it is what's going to build not just generational wealth, but generational influence for ourselves and our community, because that's really what we're lacking. And it's that ownership that's going to transform, almost like alchemy, our visibility into real power. So I spent 25 years, you can do the math and figure out how old I am, in corporate America, which was, I wasn't a doctor, wasn't a nurse, but, checked all the boxes that made my parents happy, because had the bi-weekly paycheck, had subsidized healthcare, had paid vacations, and a year ago, I stopped getting all that. Right, because I wanted to focus on Dear Flor, the company that I've been building with my husband for the last 2 years. And so, while we were the first to launch gummies with Filipino flavors, we are certainly not the first Filipinos in cannabis, right? Filipinos have been part of the cannabis narrative, God, for longer than any of us can remember, right? But our presence there is really not something that we want to be remembered for, because it goes back to 1930s and Harry Anslinger, right, who very famously demonized what he called Negroes, Filipinos, Mexicans, and entertainers, right, effectively criminalizing people who are black, brown, or just different. Today we live at a time when cannabis is legal, right, but while Filipinos are probably some of the best bartenders that you'll find in the dispensaries, they're wonderful community educators, and they're some of our fiercest advocates for cannabis. There aren't many people like us who are owners in this space. And if you try to make the journey to become an owner in the cannabis space in markets like California, it's becoming harder and harder to do so. Let's backtrack to around 2 years ago when we started selling, when we first launched Dear Flor, we launched it here in California, right? And we were one of the many companies, despite our success, who had to reset our business model because we just weren't being paid by our dispensaries, right? We talk about net 30, net 60, net 90, net 120 terms. For some of these dispensaries, it was literally net never. They just didn't tell us that when we were contracted to it. And so we ended up moving to federally legal hemp D9 because it was the only pathway for not just visibility, but the only real pathway that would actually give companies that were small, independent, minority-owned, women-owned, a real chance to compete. That said, something that we're facing on not just the state but federal level are legislative challenges. So how many of you are familiar with SB 378? Is anyone here? I saw one hand in the back. Most people are not. Okay, I know Pia is for sure. But most people are not familiar with this. But let me tell you a little bit about it. It's a bill that is attempting to regulate out or eliminate hemp products in your state. But it's ultimately going to kill the hemp THC industry because they're going after the technology platforms that enable us to sell. Right? So they're going after not me, not Pia. They're going after Shopify, Meta, if we sell in your market. And let's be very real. Bills like SB 378, they're not really about regulatory cleanup. They're really a reflection of systems that are fundamentally and structurally broken. And when you have systems that are structurally broken like this, the states do what they can to keep the power that they want in place, so they're protecting the power of the few and eradicating pretty much any individual or model that just is counter to that model. So what does that mean for us? So whether you work in cannabis or any other industry, because I think this is true for every single person in this room, we cannot wait for systems to make room for us. We've been here for how long? So if that's the case, how do we start getting our share of the pie? Well, it comes back to my original proposition which is, we got to own our shit. Sorry, Abby. Sorry for the language. Ownership is ultimately how we're going to move from being everybody's labor force to the leaders that actually drive industries. We have the size, we have the power from a financial standpoint to do so. We just need to step into it already. So only 5% of Asian-owned businesses are Filipino businesses. That's just not a statistic that I want to accept, and I don't think anybody in this room wants to accept that either. So earlier this week, we launched the 100 Ways to Filipino community. It is a free, member-led community for owners and founders, built by owners and founders. We have a very simple mandate, and it's in 5 years to increase the number of Filipino American-owned businesses from that 5% to 10%. Truthfully, I think we can do it in 2 with just a little bit of focus, right? So if this is something that's interesting to you, come find me during a break. Would love to talk about what you're doing. Would love to know what help looks like for you. If you have help that you can offer members of our community, want to know about that too. So please find me, let's talk about this, because frankly, it's not just about owning something, it's about owning it together, and that, sisters, is the real power. Thank you.